I lacked a tremendous amount of consistency in my game all the way through. And it wasn't one game from the next. I got slower, or my hands got worse, or my shot got worse. It had nothing to do with my ability at all. It had everything to do with up here and my belief system and my lack of knowing how to navigate some of these feelings and emotions that I had, both good and bad. How do we manage that? How do we develop strategies and ways to recognize when we are too high or too low, and how do we get back to that balance? That's something that I didn't learn. That's something that I didn't have, and I believe could have changed, sure, my hockey career would have been great, but just my life.
That was Brady Leavold, a former NHL prospect who tragically found himself homeless and suicidal on the streets of Vancouver, but is now in recovery and is sharing his message about mental health. And you are listening to the Up My Hockey podcast with Jason Podolak. Just watch me now. Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolak, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolak, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hey there, welcome back to the Up My Hockey podcast, or welcome to the Up My Hockey podcast if this is your first show. I am your host, Jason Podolak, and today we have on a pretty heavy hitter here, a pretty interesting guest, and we maybe not traditional in the sense of an established long-time pro career, but a hockey player nonetheless, a pro hockey player nonetheless. And what makes this guest special is his story, his unique story, his unbelievable bring you to your knees type story, the type of story that no parent wishes upon their son or daughter. It's the type of story that you absolutely are petrified about, and Brady couldn't be a better spokesperson for it. Brady is from the West Coast of Canada. Grew up playing in the WHL, and also I think had some time in the BCHL. He was a very good player, a good enough player to earn a camp invite. He was with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Believe he signed a pro contract. He did sign a pro contract. But along the way, for Brady, things went off the rails. And went off the rails in a way of substance abuse, painkillers, alcohol, turned into heroin, turned into a journey to where nobody listening here has probably ever been, or nobody wants to go. And that journey is brought Brady to Hastings Street. And if you're at all familiar with Vancouver, it's a place that as you drive by, as Brady says in the interview, that his dad used to take him there and say, this is where you don't want to be. This is what happens if you don't do X and you don't do Y. And by all accounts, there's no reason Brady would ever have been there. I mean, he was a successful student athlete. He was a successful student. He was a hard worker. But to his own account, and we get into that into this interview here, he didn't have the mechanisms in place to handle adversity. They didn't have the mechanisms in place to handle defeat and to handle some of these things that happened to him along the way, not to mention things outside of hockey that he gets into. And his coping mechanism was one to turn around, walk away, or to hide it. And that's where the substance abuse kicked in. That's where homelessness, he wound himself up in homelessness. That's where he wound himself up in jail. But now things are different. Brady is 3 years sober. He's chosen to use his own experience as a platform for others who have mental health challenges to warn others about the possibilities that he thought would never happen to him. And he is very emphatic in saying that again and again and again, that he was not the person that you would ever think this would happen to, but it did. And he's doing great things. He has created a company called Puck Support. He is going around doing keynote addresses, schools, teams, where have you, to talk about his story, to share his story. And he's doing on-ice skills stuff, and he's getting back in the game, and he's involved, and he's contributing, and he's being an awesome member of the community, and the community has been awesome to him. And it was just wild talking with him. Absolutely wild talking with him. He's doing so many good things right now. You know, he's very, very authentic, very transparent. He's very real, right? He's very raw. And I think part of his rawness and his realness is part of his therapy, because that's what got him into trouble originally, is not being able to be vulnerable, not being able to share what was going on with him. And we also talk about the idea that he didn't have the tools to deal with it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. He didn't have the tools to deal with it. And then when he had the mental health questions, he didn't want to go there and be vulnerable enough to share what was happening. So, yeah, I mean, we kind of unpacked that a little bit in this podcast, like talking about the tools. Like, if you have the tools and if you know how to use them and if you have the support, you might not get to the places that he got to, where now he was saying, boy, he wished he would have talked to somebody. Like, yes, like the message that he has is talk, share what you got going on. You are not alone. And that is 1,000,000% correct. And I couldn't be more adamant about that as well. But boy, wouldn't it be nice to not have to get to a state of, you know, suicidal thoughts, of criminal activity, of, you know, of. So we talked about this from both sides, or two sides of kind of the same coin. And it was really wild. You know, I think one thing I want to talk about, or at least share here, is, you know, mental health is his, I think at Mental Health Hockey is his handle on Instagram. He's a blue check mark. He's got like 40,000 followers. Super cool what he's doing there. Again, very transparent with his story. But mental health is a tagline. I mean, it's a tagline. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but it is a phrase now. It is a term that's being used, and it's one that Brady used. And to me, when I hear mental health, I think more, for me, I think more along the lines of clinical, right? When you have like a mental health disorder, or if we're talking about like clinical depression, I think of mental health in that sense. And when I'm talking about with my clients, or what I do with teams or individuals, I'm talking about mental fitness and the mental fitness tools, the mindset required to help you not have mental health problems. So if that makes any sense at all, if we can cut through, you know, the two there, I think there is worth in making that distinction, because I think that the term mental health is super important, and there's many people advocating for it. Corey Hirsch comes to mind, Brady Leavold comes to mind, and there's, you know, the Bell Talk days, and all of that is fantastic stuff, and the stigma is being removed from that. But there still is a feeling about what that actually means. And I think that it's easier for some people, especially youth, and maybe even more so for adults, that, well, I don't have mental health problems. I just get down every once in a while. I get depressed, or, you know, maybe you don't quite lean into challenge, or you turn away when things get a little bit hard sometimes. You like being comfortable. I mean, change bothers you. Like, maybe some of these things are maybe where you're at, and you don't think that you're in a spot where you need, you know, support, or you need to share anything necessarily. Like, you're not in a mental health need state of need, but maybe your mental fitness is lacking. Maybe you don't have the mindset tools, you know, to really ramp up what's going on. So, yeah, why do I bring that up? Well, just because I think words matter, and I think how we associate with words matter. Just how when I talk with my athletes about, you know, an event that happens in their life, the story they tell themselves about that event matters. It matters a ton. How we relate to it, what it means to us, what lessons we're going to take from it. And the same thing when we talk about mental health or mental fitness, or we talk about depression, or we talk about anxiety, or we talk about performance anxiety, or all these words means different things to different people. So mental health is a real deal issue. Brady again talks about it, where he got to with his mental health and what he thinks is a great solution for others and what he's a proponent for. And then I'm talking about mental fitness, right? And the strength, the inner strength that we can have to make our days better, right? To make our performances better, to make our practice better, to make our ability to deal with whether it be day-to-day frustrations or whether it be real life hockey issues, you become empowered to do that. So long-winded intro here on a really great human who has been literally to hell and back. He has that podcast, Hockey to Hell and Back. It used to be Heroin to Hell and Back, I believe. We talk about that on the podcast as well. He changed the title just for kind of branding scenarios. And yeah, I mean, like I said, he's doing great things. He's doing a ton of good stuff out there in the community. He talks about his journey through junior hockey, his journey through substance abuse, and how it happened, and his coping mechanisms, and what his message is. And I think it's a really important message to share. And I think it's a really wise one to listen to, not only as an adult, but also potentially to share with your kids, to listen about what can happen, what we need to be careful about, and how we can solve any type of potential problems that may arise. And as we say in the episode, I mean, if adversity hasn't happened, it's coming. It's coming, especially if you're in this hockey world and the funnel gets tighter. At some point, it's happening, right? And we want to be equipped with the mental fitness tools to be able to handle it so it doesn't become a mental health issue. So, yes, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Brady Leavold.
Brady Leavold. Long time coming, Brady, but thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. It's man, I feel like it's been forever, but I'm a firm believer in everything happens when it's supposed to happen, and I'm grateful to be here and love what you do, Pods.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, now, as you just were saying that, like I and off air, I was asking you about your podcast, but I actually think that you reached out to me, I think, first to be a guest on your podcast, and I think I was underwater at the time and just couldn't come around to it. And then you stepped away from the podcast. I stepped more fully into mine, and then I was chasing you around a little bit. But anyways, like you said, sometimes this happens for a reason. So happy to have you.
Yeah, really grateful to be here. And I've taken a little bit of time off my podcast and doing guest appearances because I think over the first couple of years there, I did well over 250, close to 300 podcasts. I've taken a break and glad to be back in the saddle because this is what I really, really love to do. So
fantastic. Yeah, well, you know what a great place to start, maybe just with the fact of the podcast. And so my introduction to you and not knowing your story, actually it just came clear when we were just talking, because you did reach out to me first and I didn't know who you were. I didn't really know your story. And you requested me to be a guest, and the name of your podcast scared the shit out of me, to be quite honest. Like Hockey to Heroin to Hell Back, I think.
Yeah, it was called Hockey to Heroin: The Road to Recovery, and for that reason, and I'll tell you, it's kind of a funny story. I wanted it to be like exactly that, where it's almost scary, where you can't. It's so like you see it and you're like, what, right? But I'll tell you, I've changed the name. It's now called Hockey to Hell and Back. And the reason being is because Doug Gilmore came on my show a couple times. He's a friend of mine, many other guys too, but it was Doug that really, I remember seeing the picture the second time he came on, and there's a picture of Doug Gilmore with the title Hockey to Heroin: The Road to Recovery. He was great with it. Like, he didn't care, right? He said whatever. He didn't say anything about it. But I was looking at that picture and I was like, that just doesn't sit right with me. So I need to make it a little bit more user friendly, if you will, and we changed it to Hockey to Hell and Back after 70 something episodes. So
there you go. So yeah, so that was like a trigger for me. And I'm a business guy. I mean, I'm a brand guy, and I didn't know your story, and I just didn't know what that whole thing was. So I was a bit scared of it, to be honest. And then I
Of
found out
course.
that it was more about like you, obviously, and your story. But isn't that interesting? Yeah, that you connected that too with the guest. You know, like there is a front facing type of potential issue there. So interesting that you switched it. But I mean, but that is like the precursor or like the reason why we're here, and it's your story, and a massively powerful one, because now I have heard you speak live. You might follow you on Instagram, as you know, and I know what you're up to in the hockey community, and you're very transparent, very honest, very raw, very real, and I think that's the beauty about what you do, not to mention the power of your story. So because this is a hockey development scenario, I mean, my podcast is about players that want to make it, and you were one of the players that were wanting to make it. You know, I mean, it just so happens that there was a few speed bumps along the way for you that were different than most, and I want to get into both of those. But maybe we can just rewind a little bit and talk about Brady as a minor hockey player, and what that looked like and where you grew up playing.
Yeah, I love going back to the minor hockey days. I was really fortunate to play in Port Coquitlam, and really small center, especially back then. It's half an hour east of Vancouver, and very lucky that in my age group, from I'm in 87, so the 86, 87, and 88 birth years had some really good players in it, which really elevated myself and pushed me to keep going, because back then there were no what do they call it, not necessarily, there was no academies for sure, but none of this major midget where you just played in your, wherever you lived you played, right? Probably
Yeah.
the same, very similar for you. And I don't know, I fell in love with the game of hockey right away. I think like a lot of us, the speed, circa 1992, Pavel Bure, like that was everything to me. I saw how fast he was, and I saw the excitement of when he got the puck. And I was at his first game in Vancouver with my dad, and like I'll never forget it. And in that moment, I was like, that's what I want to do. And I more than anything though, it wasn't like I never got nervous. Like I wasn't like, okay, that's what I want to do. It's just that I really enjoyed it that much that I just wanted to spend as much as my time that I could doing that. And I went through some early childhood traumas. My parents got divorced. My dad was a single dad. Raised me and my sister, and fantastic human. He's a scout in the Western Hockey League, retired firefighter, like unbelievable dad, unbelievable guy. Everybody has nothing but great things to say about my dad, but just unfortunately he's not my mom, right? And there was times when I was missing my mom and needed my mom, and she wasn't there, and it was tough. And shortly after that, I went through probably the hardest thing I ever went through, where I was sexually abused. And I don't want to get into that too much, but what that really did is it really threw me into hockey, because that became my escape. And really, I think my first addiction. And looking back on it, maybe to an unhealthy level, because I was just suppressing everything that I was feeling with hockey. But because I played a lot of hockey, as anybody knows, if you spend a lot of time doing something, you get fairly good at it. And I played AAA all the way through and never faced much adversity, never got cut from a team, and always had a tremendous amount of success on the ice. And I was one of those kids that was late to the party, to puberty. And at 13, 14 years old, I was tiny, like the smallest kid in the entire league, I think, as far as Bantam age players. And I didn't get drafted to the WHL because I went to the U16. And that was really the first time, I think, in my life that I really felt uncomfortable in a situation, right? School had been fairly easy up to that point, as far as friends and the social life. I never got picked on. I never got bullied. I never really felt what that was like. And when I went to the U16s, used to be called the BC Best Ever, all of a sudden now I'm not the best player there. And there were certain guys that clicked up who had played on a spring team, and they were just honestly brutal to me, awful to me. And I think big reason why is because I was a bit of an ass to play against in the regular season, and a little bit of an agitator. So when it came time for that, they weren't really accepting of me, and it really didn't feel great. And after the first ice time, I actually faked being sick. I was 14 or 15 years old. I remember telling my dad, like, I'm sick, I can't go back. And I would have made that regional team, I'm sure of it, because I went back the next year and went to U17 and top 40 and all that kind of stuff. But really, it was the first time in my life where I felt uncomfortable on the ice, and it didn't feel very good. And so I didn't get drafted to the Western League, but ended up getting listed by Swift. And I think minor hockey for me was just a ton of fun. That time of not hitting puberty when everybody else got bigger, stronger, that was really tough. Like there was times where I almost quit hockey at 14, 15 years old, because again, I wasn't used to having that adversity, certainly on the ice, and it didn't feel very comfortable. And that's something where you talk about mindset and battling through. Like I wasn't equipped to understand, what was going on, how I was feeling, how to communicate that, and how to get myself into a place where I could be confident and believe in my abilities, and be able to be in a place to actually give it my all, instead of being one of those guys that was, oh, I get uncomfortable and I quit. And I'm 35 and I could talk about this now, but I look back and I'm like, wow, like that's not a great place to be, especially if you're aspiring to be a high level hockey player. Because guess what? There's going to be a ton of adversity along the way, not just in hockey, but in life. And that's sort of like where my minor hockey kind of ended. Was, I went and played junior B after my last year of Bantam there. I was 15 or whatever it was. So that's what we did back in the day, was play junior B, because again, there was no major midget or anything like that. And, I had a tremendous amount of success in junior B, and, actually made the Swift Current Broncos at 16 years old, played in one game, got an assist. And, at that time, I don't know what your experience was like, played junior, but bullying and hazing was really prevalent. And I got it really bad in Swift Current. And I ended up, calling my dad and crying on the phone and saying, hey, like after that first game, like I don't want to be here, because I wasn't being accepted by the guys on the team. And now hockey wasn't working for me. And now I felt like I had absolutely nothing to really allow me to feel comfortable, where hockey was that addiction, that escape, everything. And now it wasn't working, and I didn't know what to do. And for the first time in my life, at 16 years old, I can remember really contemplating not wanting to be here anymore, not just in Swift Current, but not wanting to be alive, because I felt, this is it, and this is the way it is. I don't know what else there is for me. And that's what I did. And ended up going back at 17, but my junior career was really tough. I got Rookie of the Year of the Swift Current Broncos that year, but struggled tremendously off the ice. My mental health was not great, because what I didn't mention, Pods, is that I didn't talk to anybody. Like I didn't tell anybody what happened to me as a kid. I didn't have any sort of counseling for the breakup between my parents. And I thought, like, hey, like I can't tell anybody what's going on with me, because my idea, especially as a hockey player, was like, we're tough and we got to suck it up. And that's what I tried to do all along the way, until finally I just broke. And that kind of happened that year, that 17-year-old year, where, I ended up taking a 5-6 day leave from Swift Current, which would now be recognized as a mental health leave of absence. But I came back to the team, and again, it's not like I was telling anybody, not the coaches, not my player, the teammates, sorry. Like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, because I felt ashamed and embarrassed and everything else. But because I didn't talk, it opened the door for those guys on the team to really think whatever they wanted to think. So I started to get the nickname like Baby, and they'd be like, go home again, baby, get out of here, you're a quitter, you're this. And nobody really had an understanding of what I was going through. And again, a big part of that is on me, because I wasn't willing or ready to talk about it. And it just made it really difficult. And that's where I started to get into alcohol and trying to fit in with the older guys. And for someone like myself, I found that I had a really hard time turning that off. And you can hop in here, but up to that point in time in my life, I really had this stance where, like, drugs will never be a part of my story. Like, I can't reiterate that enough. Like, through school, through high school, I always say this. I think if you could go back to my high school and say, who would be one of the last person in this school to ever use drugs or to become a drug addict, a lot of people probably would have said me. I was the top athlete in school. Like, I didn't hang out with anybody like that. Everybody knew that I don't do drugs. I don't associate with people that do drugs. And I never even saw it. It was never even a possibility. But all of a sudden now I'm in this horrible mindset and thrust into some new situations after I graduated high school, where my thinking became unclear, and I started to make pretty poor decisions, and started to break some of my own personal boundaries. And that's sort of where the hell started.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, thanks for sharing all that. I mean, I wrote some notes as you were going there, and I wouldn't mind to reverse the train and just maybe revisit some of it. It's like the first thing you brought up, and I don't want to get into it either. You said you didn't want to get into it, but was like the sexual trauma. What age were you when that happened?
Yeah, so I was 5 and the first time, and then 6 the following year. So it happened on a couple different occasions, and it's not that I don't mind talking about it. I just kind of skipped ahead of it, and like for me that was really tough because it was from a distant relative in my family at a family reunion. And I think a lot of times I was definitely in situations where there's 50 to 100 people, and we're all family, we're all friends. We're at this kind of fishing lodge, and there's all these individual cabins, and actually my extended family owned the whole resort up in Loon Lake, British Columbia. And I think it was one of those instances where nobody had any sort of reason to believe that anybody was a predator, and kids were just running from one cabin to the next, and everyone's together and everyone's family. Where's Brady? Oh, he's down there, and no big deal. And when that happened to me, it was an older guy that abused me. I shut down. But then very shortly after, I started to, as I think a lot of people do in school and hockey dressing rooms and different places, you start to hear language, homophobic language and different slurs, and start to see people get picked on. And I would say 99.99% of the time, it was on false allegations of people just making stuff up and labeling somebody as something. And I saw them get targeted and bullied. And I can still remember, like clear as day, like thinking like, I can't tell anybody what happened to me, because look what's happening to, Jimmy or Johnny over there. And that's not even true. If people find out what happened to me, I'm going to be like, my life is over. And so that's sort of what I did, is I stuffed it down, and I was like, I'm never going to tell anybody. And I didn't tell anybody until I think the first time I told somebody I was 27. And the next time I talked, that was just one time I told some random person. And then the next time I didn't talk about it really until I was 32 years old, 3 years ago. So it took a long time for me to talk about it. And now I understand that it was absolutely and is absolutely crucial for me to be able to talk about it and receive the help that I need to work through it. And that's something that I need to revisit again. I haven't done a ton of work surrounding that in the last 2.5 years. When I first started my podcast 3 years ago and started to share my story, I was doing some therapy, but I got to a place where I thought, I've done enough, and I'm in a good place, and I'm now understanding that it's gonna have to be ongoing, and that's okay. And then there's other stuff that have come up along the way now too, where it's like, okay, I need to revisit and get some help, and so that's kind of where I'm at today. Is I thought, okay, I've dealt with it, I've done some work, but unfortunately it's going to be one of these things that's going to be with me for the rest of my life, and I'm always like thinking and trying to find new ways to help manage that. But I can sit here and say that I'm not doing enough. I'm not actively participating in my own recovery at this point in time enough, because for the first couple of years it was so exciting. I'm clean, I'm good, and all this good stuff was happening. But the reality is like life goes on, and things happen, and I'm starting to understand triggers and different things that can kind of push me back. So for anyone out there that's listening, I think the stat is 1 in 5 now. It was 1 in 6 boys will be sexually assaulted in some way. So I'm sure there's probably somebody listening or watching this right now who is in a similar situation to me. And unfortunately, a lot of people have never shared that with anybody. So I could say that if you are one of those people who is a survivor like me, please tell somebody, get some help, and allow others to help you walk through it. Because once I was able to do that, though I still have some work to do, but once I was, willing to face it and get vulnerable and go back there, that's where I really started to be able to begin to heal.
Yeah, and you know what? That's exactly why I asked that question, just because I wanted to get to that spot, like as far as from a reflection standpoint. And I didn't realize you were 5 or 6. I mean, that is so tragic. I mean, gosh, to even think that you could talk or what's going to happen. But I mean, at some age, right? Like, and I'm sure there's not many 5 or 6-year-olds listening to this podcast, that's for sure. But I know there is some teenage hockey players listening to this, and just listen to Brady there, and like listen to his, like, there was massive amounts of resistance, right? Massive amounts of I can't and I shouldn't and I won't. Yet, by your own words, it was the most therapeutic thing that you could do and something that was super necessary. So, I mean, if you can push through that resistance, listen from somebody who's been there. I don't have that experience. I can't say how hard it is to come forward. I can imagine it, but I mean, I have no idea. But I mean, to hear it from someone like you, I think that advice is super, super powerful, and and it kind of, I mean, on a way more or less like a more superficial level, I mean, it is something that I talk with my players about, right? Like the things that are upsetting you, the things that you are resistant towards, the things that, aren't aligning with whatever it is that you're trying to do. Like, you got to be able to figure that out with somebody, preferably, right? And I just think that that's, especially when it comes to male, well, again, I shouldn't preface that, but it seems to me like females are much more apt to discuss things. So I shouldn't paint it with a really broad brush, but I do know my environment is much better than the female environment. And I know that our environment is one that you've already spoke to. It seems like it's one where we're, we got this armor on and we're steel clad, and we're supposed to be the emotional stalwart for those around us. And when we have that kind of persona, it makes it hard for us to be able to share. And it doesn't mean like necessarily fuzzy, hug it out kind of stuff, but just be able to actually be honest with wherever we're at. And so here's someone like you. I mean, I really do appreciate that. I think for me, like at the core of everything we're going to talk about here today is I hope people are listening to your availability, right? And I think that availability, that authenticity and that transparency is so freeing. Like, again, I've never experienced the stuff you've experienced, but I've just found when I can live in myself honestly and with integrity, that it's easy, because you're not protecting anything anymore, right? Like, you are who you are. People can take you or leave you. It's so freeing. It's so, I don't know. There's just something to that. So, I mean, I really hope that that's the message here today. And I mean, I appreciate you for setting the stage already with it, because I think it's really powerful to hear someone like you be able to speak like that.
Yeah, well, thanks. I just want to say too, right? Like, that's my story, and trauma comes in many different forms. And it could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It could be abandonment. It could be being bullied in school. It could be any number of things. And people are always like, well, I don't know, I haven't gone through something as bad as you or whatever. And I just stop them right there, because maybe on the outside something may look worse, but it's all perspective to each individual, and pain is pain. And if you're in pain and you're hurting, you don't have to sit in it alone. And that's what I did for so many years. And as you're probably going to hear in a short time as we go on, because I sat in that pain and thought I had to deal with it on my own, it opened the door for all sorts of horrible things to happen. And it just set me on this path of absolute hell, one that I'm very lucky to get out of. And I reflect on a daily basis of how am I still alive, and there's going to be young hockey players who are out there now, maybe listening or watching, that, think that their lives could never, go down the path of mine. But unfortunately, it happens all over the world. And all the time I see it comes back to trauma. And so I think if you're feeling any sort of emotions where you're feeling like you're in pain, please find somebody to talk to, because if I could go back and do that, I so would, because it would have saved years of not just pain and hell for me, but those that were around me and loved and cared about me, that just wanted to support me and be there for me. And I didn't allow them to be, because I was scared to talk. And eventually that's what I had to do was talk and get it out. So it was inevitable if I was going to work through it, that this was the steps that I was going to take. So I just want to one more time say, please reach out, please ask for help.
When you talked about your U16 experience there and the faking the illness. Now, I want to have a discussion about this. There's no judgment intended here at all, but I do. Obviously, I listen to you, and then I hear things in my world, right, and with what I do, and kind of even what my philosophy. And one of my philosophies is to provide tools for these athletes to be resilient, right, to be able to be empowered in situations where things are uncomfortable. And your response to that scenario was, but faked an illness to not be exposed to it, right? Like that's a pretty dramatic step, right? And from somebody like you, who's a scrapper, and I know enough about you now for the way you played, like you're a fighter, but you went the other direction on that. Now, you're 37 years old now, I think. Is that the right?
Well, almost 36, but
okay, almost 36. So 35 years old right now. Now you have the ability to look back on that 15-year-old. Like, do you think that if you were more well equipped with some, whatever you want to call them, strategies, tools, that maybe like that could have helped you through some of this stuff that you're talking about?
Absolutely. There's absolutely no question in my mind. I had zero strategy. My strategy was run away and get out of this uncomfortable situation. And it put a halt on my hockey. Like after that, I made that decision. Every single player on that team that made that team got drafted to the WHL. And there were guys that got drafted that, I really think I was better than or whatever. And so I had to live that whole year knowing that I controlled my own fate, right? And I made the choice and I had to live with it. And there was a 6-month period of time where I was like, wow, that was the biggest mistake ever. You might as well just quit hockey now. So it was this close. I mean, my dad wasn't even going to register me for hockey that year. And because I told him not to. And I go back to like, what if I was set up to understand that there is going to be adversity. And when you're feeling these emotions, what are the strategies? What are the coping mechanisms? How could I have been better set up for success? Not just on the ice, but off the ice, because I'll tell you that in that, it became what we do and how we act. At least me, I found that can become patterns and you do something once and then it's very easy to do it again. And, I did that a couple times when I was playing in the Western Hockey League too, where I was feeling so crappy, so down, and I didn't know how to manage it. I didn't know. And now I know that there's guys like you who teach us about mindset and these strategies. And I feel grateful that the young athletes of today have this, because I believe that there's going to be players, maybe not the exact same situation, but I'll guarantee a lot of players have that feeling at some point where they feel like they don't belong or they're not good enough or they're not going to make it. And they feel like, hey, I just want to walk away or it's uncomfortable. On the other side, I know there's people that thrive on that and they say, okay, I'm just going to fight through it. But not everyone's the same. But I think a lot of hardship and opportunities can be created just based on the mind. Because I'll tell you, there's a very fine line as we get older in hockey, through junior and pro. There's a very small difference in ability and skill and these things where you have to develop other parts of your game than just skill or ability, because at some point everyone is so close. But if you can't find that consistency and you can't bring it every night, then think about the opportunity you're going to lose, because there's guys everywhere just waiting for that next opportunity, whether it's in junior, whether it's in pro. And I just think that I lacked a tremendous amount of consistency in my game all the way through. And I said this to you earlier, it wasn't it wasn't one game from the next I got slower, or my hands got worse, or my shot got worse. It had nothing to do with my ability at all. It had everything to do with up here and my belief system and my lack of knowing how to navigate some of these feelings and emotions that I had, both good and bad. Because, you know, when I was really high, I was too high. And when I was really low, I was too low. And I remember, you know, Dean Chenault was my coach in Swift for 3 or 4 years. And he was the king of like, don't get too high, don't get too low. And now I'm 35 going, now I know what he means. But again, it's easy to say that. How do we manage that? How do we develop strategies and ways to make sure that we're not getting too high and too low? And how do we recognize when we are too high or too low? And how do we get back to that balance? That's something that I didn't learn. That's something that I didn't have. And I believe could have changed, you know, sure, my hockey career would have been great, but just my life, like the highs and the lows of life. Because guess what? I still go back to, oh, this is uncomfortable. This is hard. I'm going to run away.
Yeah, man. Like you nailed everything there about what I'm super passionate about. Why I do what I do is because like that's something that you read in the paper. We can't get too high. We can't get too low. Right. The thing is what the hell does it mean? And how do you do it? Right. Like that's just a perfect example. And I do believe that it can be taught. That's the other thing though, too. Like on the flip side of that, I do believe there is a way that you can connect the dots for players that maybe don't quite innately understand it, or from their environment or their upbringing or the parents that they were around, that they have a better idea of what that means, right? Like better personality type. So there is some nuance, I think, to that. And I think there is some innate ability. I'm not one to, you know, detract from the idea that there's some innateness to a skill set, whether it be emotional or physical. But I am a massive component of the growth mindset philosophy, and that these things can be learned. Like resilience can be learned. I 100% believe that. But you have to have the tools in front of you. You have to have the support in place, and then these things can happen. Like back when I got 9 years, I think, on you, and I think probably 9 years before me, it was probably even worse. And I don't know exactly where it was, but I'm just mean as far as like the have it or you don't philosophy, right? Like that was so prevalent back when I was coming up. Either you had it or you didn't have it, right? Either you had the character or you didn't, or you were able to have the mental toughness or you didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's bullshit, right? I really do. Like some guys are get it more naturally, but it doesn't mean that just because somebody, you know, like yourself is a little more akin to stepping away from the fight originally and going the other way. It doesn't mean you're not capable of stepping into it with the proper support and with the proper, mindset training tools. So that's what fires me up, because I know there's so many athletes out there, and I've seen it again and again and again. When you connect the dots a little differently for them, or you line it with their way of thinking, like, my gosh, the sky's the limit, right? And so when I hear your story, it's just like, shit, like you might have been one of those guys that, like, you know, with a little bit of a training manual and with a little bit of support, things might have worked out a hell of a lot differently for you.
No, there's no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind.
Just going to take a short break from the conversation with Brady to brighten your day. And how am I going to brighten your day? I'm going to brighten your day by sharing a story with you. I'm going to read a testimonial with you from a young lady who recently graduated the Peak Potential Hockey Project. And when I read this, I have actually teared up before. I usually get a little bit emotional. So we'll see when I read it if I do this time or not. I haven't read it in a while, but I do want to share it with you. And I'm going to read it. And what really, like, for a coach, for me to read this, I mean, something that I created that a player has gone through and has benefited from, it obviously warms me inside as a coach. But when I read this from the eyes of a parent, like if I was to read this as her mother or father, and if this was like my son or daughter that had wrote this, like that's when I actually get really emotional, because like the power of that through that lens, I think it's monumental, really. And yeah, so I'm just going to read this to you, and I want to go over it a little bit. But this is from a U18 female hockey player, U18 A-level hockey player named Desiree. And she took the time to write this to me and to share her thoughts about what the Peak Potential Project did for her. Title: How Peak Potential Helped Me. Jason Padolin's course helped me in many ways. It has made me a better player and person. One of the ways it helped me is being able to change a negative or primal emotion into a positive or powerful emotion. This helps me to get out of bad funks in my day or game, allowing it to take a turn for the better. I have noticed that after the course and using the methods that were learned, I have had less bad days than I used to. When I apply it to hockey, I can change a bad game into a good one. Another way this course helped me is that I'm a much better self-evaluator without being destructive. I am more self-aware, confident, and I'm also way more open to failure and trying new things. I have learned how to practice a growth mindset while learning new skills, making learning them a quicker and more enjoyable process. Peak Potential Hockey has definitely made me a better player, student, and person. That's a big wow. It's a big wow for me in a lot of ways. When she talks at the start there about primal and powerful, that's from week 1. Week 1 of the Peak Potential Hockey Project is where we discuss states, emotional states, and what state each individual player needs to find in order to have their best performance. A lot of time players don't think about that and don't connect that dot when they're trying to prepare for a hockey game. Why are we inconsistent? Why do things not go well? They're not connecting their state to that performance. So we talk about primal emotions and powerful emotions and how to connect to those states and how to create that. So that's where that language is coming from in her first bit. But for her to be first of all, that first line made me a better player in person. I tell people that when I'm talking to people, what does it do? I'm like, well, it's about hockey and you become a better hockey player because it's this lens. It's what the player wants, right? That's why they're going to be working on mindset and personal development, because they want to be great hockey players. But the actual reality of it is that there's this overflowing into just the type of human you are, right? And potentially the type of student you are and the type of friend that you are and the type of teammate that you are. And in her first line, she recognizes that I've become a better player and a better person, massive 2 check marks for me. She talks about the ability to control her emotions, massive check marks. She talks about that ability has allowed her to have less bad days. There's a massive connection to what we're talking about here with Brady, right? The difference between mental fitness and mental health. She is more mentally fit now, so she has less bad days. She has more positive days. She has a more positive life experience. She's able to wake up on a more regular basis and have good, prosperous, meaningful days. As a mother or daughter, or as a mother or father, that just puts a big smile on my face. And obviously as her coach. I can turn a bad game into a good one. Fantastic. In other ways, of course, much better self-evaluate without being destructive. How many of us, even as adults, kick the crap out of ourselves, super destructive with our self-analysis, super critical. And players, young adults, are no different, especially when they're starting to analyze themselves through the teenage years when it comes to the social consequences of their looks or their style or their acceptedness or their inclusivity, not to mention how they've played, how they've practiced, their skill set, what they're good at, what they're not good at. The ability to build our self-awareness, which is one of the key pieces of the Peak Potential Project, is to continually build that skill throughout. Our ability to self-assess honestly. We can still critique, but we can't be critical. There's a massive difference. She even used the words destructive. A lot of people are destructive. She's less destructive. She's built her self-awareness. Fantastic. She is more confident. She is open to failure and to trying new things. Any one of these by itself, I would be super excited that the program served that purpose for her and helped her mature and helped her grow and helped empower her. But we're talking about all of these things. She has definitely become a better student, person, and player. Super, super, super super grateful. One, for her words. Super grateful that the course was able to do that for her. Super grateful that she has now left the program and sounds like she's crushing life. So if that doesn't make you smile, I don't know what will. The Up My Hockey podcast, the idea of it, the origin story behind the whole thing, the genesis of it was to try and tell stories that will be able to uplift hockey players, to give them more clarity, more purpose, more meaning on their journey, and to the parents as well. And I believe that the podcast is serving that purpose. This story with Brady, I think, is a connection to this. I mean, talking about the ability and what mental fitness and personal development can do, not only for the hockey player, but also for the young adult that you might have in your house, can be super powerful. So thank you, Desiree, for writing that amazing piece. Thank you for allowing me to share it. Thank you for listening to it. And if any of you, and do you notice like there was nothing, like she didn't come into this thinking there was anything wrong with her, because there was nothing wrong with her. She was just rocking her teenage years, doing her thing, playing hockey, trying the best that she could. But she hadn't been given the tools yet that she could be thriving, right? That she could start taking new ownership of her direction. So don't feel like there has to be this broken ship and stuff has come off the rails if you're listening to the podcast about, wondering about when you should get involved with a mindset program or with the Peak Potential Project. Give them the tools. You don't know what tools they have. And if they have more tools and they're able to use them, aren't they better off? And if you can check the 14 boxes here that Desiree checked, like, my goodness, I think it is something that you will be very, very happy that you participated in. On that note, actually, since I'm talking about it, there is a new guided mission coming April 3rd. Starting April 3rd, we'll have a new cohort starting. It's the 4-week program of the Peak Potential Project. The guided mission includes me as their coach and guide throughout the program. So there's 4 coaching calls included with that. It is the most popular way to take the program. You can also take it by yourself as a solo mission. You can also take it one-on-one with me as a mentored mission. But the guided mission is the one that only has like a particular exact launch date. So if you are interested and you want to take part, and if you want to see what the program can do for your son or daughter, by all means, check it out at upmyhockey.com. Now back to the conversation with Brady Leavold.
I see parents, and I know you do on-ice stuff as well. I've seen your stuff. It's great. But the on-ice stuff is so much easier to sell, right? I don't do any of the mindset stuff. I would like to, for myself, learn about it, but also maybe not be in your position necessarily, but be able to at least have enough knowledge to give the students or my athletes a little bit of it. But I still see parents, I tell parents this all the time, because they're always going, more training, more on ice, more this. And I'm always like, why don't you spend a week off the ice and just work on like building their mental game? And parents be like, I still don't think they're computing in their brains how important that is. Like, to me, that's way more important than spending all the time on the ice or in the gym. Like, yes, you need to develop your skills, but let's just assume we're talking about players who are already of the elite caliber, AAA, WHL, maybe pro, even whatever. I just think that too much is spent on more in the gym and in the ice. On the ice. But what's your experience been on trying to get parents and players alike to understand the power of mindset? Like, what's the response been? Are people starting to understand, or is it still one of these things where, yeah, that's great, but come on, let's get on the ice and let's go. I want to see my kids sweat for 2 hours, like it,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, to your point, I think because of conversations like ours, and that's a whole nother conversation, actually, mental health versus mental fitness. And I think that they're connected, but they're very different. So maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But the idea is misunderstood, I think, and completely missed in the majority of scenarios, especially from the parents who haven't had some level of high performance. And that doesn't necessarily mean in athletics, although athletics does help. I think that connection is much easier for people who they've been whatever, a competitive golfer, a competitive swimmer or whatever, because they understand, just how you spoke, that there are days when it didn't work. And it didn't work not because their butterfly stroke was off. It worked because there was something wrong upstairs, right? They could not get off the tee. It wasn't because they didn't know how to do it. It's just because there was something wrong up top, right? So I think that the people who have experienced that before have a much easier understanding of, their 14, 15-year-old son or daughter, seeing that in them, right? So that's an easier one. The people that are, have maybe not experienced that, maybe aren't strivers in their own life, you know what I mean? Like whatever that may be in the corporate ladder or whatever. It's just it's more about the tangible. More is better, more weights, more power skating, more shooting clinics, right? Like that's easier understood. But for you and I both know, and it's like that's why I try and share the stories. And we talked a little bit before the show started about the marketing business side of what we do, and it almost sounds like a snaky type of thing, which it's not, first of all, because like these stories need to be told and people need the support. But I shy away from like sharing the testimonials and the stories. I don't know why. It's not like I really shy away from it, but there's just so much other stuff going on. But God, like you can take a player, like, and for the parents out there listening, if hockey is your number one, like, I mean, that's kind of the weird thing too, right? Like when, sometimes like hockey is more important than maybe the personal development side, the human development side, which I think is crazy. But even if you want to talk to that person that's really, really focused on the hockey performance side, there is nothing that you can do that can change the percentage points of your execution and the way you show up and you're able to deliver in big moments than working on your mental game. Like you can't go shoot pucks in the garage for 1,000 for the next month and have your shot change. But if you connect some dots differently with your mindset side of things and how you're going to show up and your intentionality and what it is you want to accomplish out there and how you're going to do it, how you're going to utilize teammates, all that stuff like explodes your potential, right? Like, so I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it multiple times and it gets me fired up just talking about it because it's like, that's the biggest competitive advantage, period. Right. Period. And so for those parents who are like, oh no, we got to work on this. It's like, well, first of all, you're crazy, right? Like this is going to be the biggest competitive advantage you can have in the hockey world, period. And guess what? Side story, you're actually going to have life skills that are going to be able to help them in school with their in their relationships and in their life after hockey. Like they're going to be more resilient, better. I mean, it's just like you get like the whole package by investing some time and some energy into this. And so, I mean, you kind of teed me up there. I mean, I guess thanks, but it like that is kind of frustrating because to answer your question full circle, if you don't know what you don't know, how do you tell them that they need it?
What about players, right? So like I did a little bit, nothing. I mean, it was so many years ago. So things have obviously evolved in great ways from the mindset standpoint. But even for me, as a young athlete, I'm thinking putting myself back in a summer situation where I was 16, 17, training with guys like Andrew Ladd and Brandon Yip. We had a really good group of guys. Everyone played in the WHL or higher. And I remember our off-ice trainer, bringing in, a guy essentially that was, was different back then, right? We're talking 15, 20 years, but really let's stop. Let's put the weights down. We're not on the ice. Let's get a journal. Let's talk things out. Let's do some stuff building on our mindset. And as a player, I'm thinking, what does this have to do with hockey? Like, come on, I should be on the ice or whatever. So are players now at the better understanding that this is so important? Because for me, I didn't understand and I figured it out way too late. So are the players, never mind the parents, when you're dealing with young athletes, do they, like, and I know everyone's different, but generally speaking, are they understanding how important this really is?
Well, not across the board, I don't think. And I think the other issue is and that was, and from first person's perspective, my perspective, there was really nothing that happened to me in my hockey career that I didn't feel that I could handle. Right. So like, which bought into this invincibility factor, what I was supposed to be anyways, right? Like this warrior hockey player and, and I'm okay in an autonomous type environment. Like I'm actually thriving in it. So like, I would like, that was my fuel, like to feed. So when my dad offered me Tony Robbins, that's part of my story, right? At like 19 years old, I just got off a gold medal at the World Juniors. And I'm like, what the F do I need Tony Robbins for? Like I got life by the tail, right? But like, that was when I was operating from a massively fixed mindset, which I know now. I didn't know the language then, right? But like I just felt that I couldn't be improving. That either you had it or you didn't. Like I operated from that scenario as well, and it couldn't be further from the truth, right? So I think first of all, for guys like me, it's harder to sell the fact of like adversity's coming, like get ready for it, like no, it's not. I got it. You know what I mean? So like the really elite guys that haven't had any issues, like they're usually like, oh no, I'm okay. When they're like that, like if anyone's listening that feels like that, like look at the Tiger Woodses of the world, or look at the Roger Federers, like these guys that have been examples in their own sport, that have been elite, like generational, historic type players. They recognize that before there's anything going wrong. They were building that aspect of them, and I mean that's what makes them super special, right? Same like a Connor McDavid. He's got people in his court that keep pushing him. He's always looking for that next advantage. So there is examples of it out there, but I think it's easier for the players who have gone through some stuff and they recognize they're not operating at maybe where they should be operating at, right? So those are the ones that are more akin to to step in, to step forward. They have these hopes and dreams, and they feel like that things aren't going exactly how they want. Which I guess is the same. I mean, that's kind of par for the course, right, Brady? Like we only really look new places when things are going how we don't want them to, right? Into a level where we feel like, yeah, I got it. I got to do something. So I guess to answer your question, there's more of that. Like the people that come to me generally they're elite performers. Don't get me wrong, but it's usually an elite performer that is having some type of struggle, right? That they're like, okay, now I need to do this. My messaging is completely opposite though. Like, of course I can help people like that. But if you are elite and you want to peak potential, that's what I talk about. If you want to step into that, then you should be thinking about mindset in some capacity.
Yeah. Proactive. Don't wait until the adversity comes. Like set yourself up for success, knowing that, hey, I don't care who you are. Even if you're Connor Bedard right now, guess what, buddy? Adversity is coming for you in some way. He might be an NHL superstar. He probably will be. But let me tell you, he's going to have some adversity, and there's going to be a lot more pushback than he's ever had in his life. And I'm just using him as an example. I don't know what he does or what he doesn't do. But I think the same thing we talk about, it's totally different. But I talk to parents who have their sons or daughters who are really struggling with mental health or addiction issues. And they always say or they've lost their son or daughter, we wish we could have done more. We wish we could have so I'm very in the same approach when we talk about mental health and this type of education, because though it may not feel like it's affecting you today, let's be proactive and let's and especially, I relate that to elite hockey players. I think if, it's really the pros, and I don't mean like the NHL guys. I mean the pros. Like you see a guy and he's like pro, and they understand that there's gonna have to be different ways that they're gonna have to build their game. It's not just practicing your shot. It's working on this. And I can't reiterate enough how much I wish I would have had someone like yourself and had these tools. And yes, like I said earlier, for my hockey career, but more than anything, for the things that I was going to have to deal with off the ice, because I was never given those tools. And you want to know what? It led me down a path of hell, because I would run and I would look for ways to get out of that feeling instead of learning ways to address it and actually thrive in it. And you talk about I fought quite a bit on the ice. I never was scared of fighting, or I wasn't scared of playing a hockey. It was more, I was scared of my own mind. I was scared of letting my teammates down, my coaches down. I was scared of making mistakes, and never felt like I was thriving, being the best version of myself on the ice, especially because all I was thinking about was mistake, or, waiting to get yelled at. That wasn't that's not a place of success. You're not going to find a ton of success in those places. And if you haven't felt that way, that doesn't mean that working on your mind, it doesn't mean you shouldn't work on your mindset. I'm telling you right now, and my girlfriend's here beside me and she's really big on this kind of stuff too, but we're looking at, whatever we can do to change. I want to fix my mindset now. I'm not an elite athlete anymore, but I'm a dad. I'm a business owner. I'm a hockey coach. I'm a mentor, and I need to, for myself, because I still have those hard days where I'm still in, I feel like 15, 14-year-old Brady that quit the U16 team because I've never spent the time to develop these strategies and to learn how to deal with all these emotions that continually come up even all these years later of self-worth and everything else. I'm playing senior hockey pods and I'm still out there going like, oh, I can't make a mistake. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's crazy, man. Like,
You're trash talking too. I love it
oh
when you're
yeah,
mic'd up
oh
there.
yeah,
That's fantastic.
that'll never change. That I can't turn that off, and I was trying my best not to. I was on my best behavior for the first 3 games until that guy crossed the line, and then I was like, no, can't do it.
I'm going to ask you a question just about that, because you're talking about accessibility to players, and I think one of the things that changed and since I was there is the access, and why I think that. And again, I don't want to set you up there. I just want you to give me your honest opinion here. But I think that players are more. I'm more relatable to players. I think I have easier access to players than what we were exposed to. Like 15, 20 years ago, it was essentially a sports psychologist would come in if you were lucky enough to find one. And that sports psychologist, generally speaking, had no on the ground experience in the sport at all, right? Was in a university and loved the athletics, and it was like speaking truth bombs, of course, but like as far as from the respect factor from the guys in the room, not across the board, but like it was like, oh, you don't get it, you don't get me, you don't get what I'm going through. So you kind of tune out. Right. And I think now, not that I'm a sports psychologist, because I'm not, I'm being very, very clear on that. There's a place for sports psychologists and I'm massive advocates for them. But I just think like that accessibility and relatability, like to get somebody to open the door and say, okay, I'm going to explore this. I think it's easier with someone like me that's been there. Like, do you think that would have been a more effective approach for a young Brady that was in the locker room at 15?
150%. And this is sort of the work that I do in the mental health and substance use disorder space is similar, right? Like I'm getting messages from people. They want people with lived experience who know what they're going through. That's where, people make that connection. And I just think if I'm 16, 17, and I had that, you're right, I had sports psychologists come in and try to help me. They got one in Swift Current, flew him in. Great guy, went for lunch with him a couple times and let him in on a little bit. But I remember sitting there going like, okay, man, you're like close to 70, which is no problem, but I'm 16. And how much can you really understand of what I'm going through? You never played hockey. You never moved away from home. You never and that's great. And he had a lot of knowledge, but I was like, I'm not telling this guy anything because he doesn't understand me. What if a guy like you came in, world junior gold medalist, played in the show, drafted, all these things, and you're saying, hey, look, I went through this. I know what you're going through, maybe not exactly, but I walked this same path and here's what I can do to help you. And for me, I'm like, okay, he's one of the guys, like he gets me and I'm going to feel more comfortable to open up. And that's right across the board, whether we're talking hockey, anywhere in life, relatability, real life experience that's relatable to someone's situation, to me, trumps everything, because now all of a sudden people, like for me, I would remove those barriers easier. Like, okay, I'll let him in a little bit more because he gets it and I feel more comfortable talking. So without question, and I think that's something that is lacking a lot in many areas where I believe too, there's places for people with education, with the PhDs and the different credentials who have gone to school. But too often the people with lived experience are not part of the conversation when really they should be the leaders in the space, because they're the ones that have the actual experience versus reading it in a textbook, say. Now, if you have the lived experience and you have the training, well, then look out, right? Like look out. Like that to me is where you're going to see the most, certainly in hockey. I think for hockey players, you'll see the most breakthroughs happen when you have that piece, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's been super helpful. And I mean, obviously why you're in so many locker rooms too, right? Like that it's the relatability. I know that it's I'm still connected to the sport. I have been to places where these young athletes want to get to, right? And to be able to speak to it from a practical scenario and not just theoretical, I think does help. It's not for everyone, but it's going back to your question, right? I do think that there's more buy-in. there's more collective buy-in, right? You're still going to have the resistors, of course, right? But I think there's much more collective buy-in. I've experienced that, and then also much more success, because the beauty part is, as soon as you say yes, right, as soon as you allow it, then holy smokes, right? That's all you have to do, right? Is just allow the possibility to be there, and then these guys get results, and then the results speak for themselves, and then they're addicted, right? Like in a good way, obviously, you know, to that process. But we haven't even really told your story yet, and I gotta apologize for that, because there's a lot of people listening going, well, what's going on? So like, you got right into it, like up into junior, you're starting to get into alcohol. You said drugs wasn't a part of it. You said you were the guy that definitely was not going to go anywhere near it. Let's walk through the next steps. I mean, I think we've painted the picture pretty good. I mean, like there's been a bit of a history, right? A track record of how we're dealing with adversity, right? How we're dealing with, or lack of dealing with, the trauma, which is kind of manifesting itself in a little bit of a snowball type way. What's the next step for you, and not only on your hockey journey, but with your addiction?
Yeah, so I left Swift Current. I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible, but I left Swift Current, and prior to leaving the Swift Current, so I got Rookie of the Year at 17 years old. And I remember, once the season was done, there was 4 or 5 days before everybody leaves to go home, and so party was on, and then year-end bender and all that. And I remember thinking like, hey, this is just kind of normal behavior. We just worked our butts off for the whole year, and now we're gonna party and we're gonna drink, and everyone was doing it. And so that's what I did for 4 or 5 days in Swift Current. Then I went home and round out high school. My grade 12 year, I had one class, which was PE, because I'd done all my classes by correspondence and got some, favorable treatment, whether we agree with it or not, because I was playing hockey, and sort of like couple classes, honestly, didn't even have to do, because they're just like, yeah, okay, which wasn't great for me in the long run, but that's what happened. And so now, because I drank for like those 4 or 5 days in a row, that was really the first time in my life where I had like a prolonged period of this like bender, and all of a sudden I went home and I had a really hard time turning that off, because now the season's over. I'm back home. I'm graduating high school. Like, it was all party time, party time, party time. And so, I was drinking a lot. I went to this music festival called Merritt Mount Music Festival. And went there after I graduated high school, and was around, hundreds of people that I knew, big party. And that's where I was introduced to drugs for the first time, and was offered it. And I, at that time, I'll just reiterate again that I had a very strong boundary that I was never going to do it. But now all of a sudden there were people that I looked up to partying, doing drugs. There were guys, hockey players and non-hockey players alike, that were all partaking in this and asking me if I wanted to. And I was kind of confused, because I'd never seen, especially hockey players, use drugs or anything, older guys. And I felt, by the third day of saying no at this music festival, I felt like, one, I was missing out. It looked like a lot of fun. And the other side of that is, it was like, well, hey, like, these people can handle it, so can I. It can't be that bad. And so I did something I thought I would never do. And I tried it for the first time. And from that moment on, it became very hard for me to put that down. And then it just became easier to try new things. So, we're talking MDMA, cocaine. I'm just going to be candid so people can hear, because those are the harsh reality is, no matter who you are, at some point in time, it seems like you're going to be forced to make these decisions surrounding drinking and drugs. And what does that look like? What can one choice, how can that affect your life forever? I wasn't prepared for how my body was going to react to drugs and alcohol. Was I predisposed because of my trauma? Absolutely. Was I predisposed because of my family history with addiction and alcoholism? Absolutely. But I had no experience with it. And it happened rather quickly, but it also, at the time, because a lot of people were doing it, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. It just seemed like, this is what we're doing. This is what we're partying. And that's what I did the rest of the summer. And when I went back to Swift Current, I ended up leaving the team 7 games in. I just packed my truck and left, because I was feeling suicidal, coming off this summer of drinking and drugging, and the same thing, being away from home, not having strategies and ways to deal with that certainly played a huge part in that. You fast forward, I went and played in the BC Hockey League for a short period of time, but drinking and drugs got in the way of that. And they tried to help me, but I didn't want the help back then. They had to kick me off the team. And then they went and won the national championship with Kyle Turris. I was playing on a line with Turris and had 9 points in my first 3 games, and when things were going well, but I was living at home, and I just started a party because during that time, my mental health really started to deteriorate, like big time. Like I just felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. Felt like sort of my impulse control was out the window, and I was just flying by the seat of my pants, making one bad decision after the next. I was able to ask Dean Chanel to go back to Swift Current at 19 because my rights, I got traded to Everett, didn't report, stayed in Burnaby. Then my rights went back to Swift Current, and then returned as a 19-year-old with the understanding that I'll probably be traded because, look at what I had done to the team and quit and left. And, the guys on the team didn't really trust me for good reason. But again, nobody knew. I wasn't telling anybody like, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is how I'm feeling. Like I didn't give anybody a chance to understand what was going on and how they could actually support me, from the coaches, the staff, the players, the trainers, the psychologists, everybody. I went back and I struggled. Like I didn't play a ton. As you can imagine, they didn't make it easy on me in the first half of the year, but had a decent year, I guess. And then was traded to Kelowna the following year and had a really good year on and off the ice. I think I drank twice the whole year at team parties that year, no drugs. And then all of a sudden I'm getting calls from my agent about, contract offers, and I had multiple offers, and I took the wrong one based on thinking I knew the owner of the team. I'm not going to get into it. And then a bunch of stuff happened with him, and he ended up losing the team and forgetting. It was a horrible decision. But ended up signing with Tampa, and thinking to myself, like I tell people this, I wasn't thinking I was going to play hockey after that final year because everybody knew that I was whatever you want to call it. Nobody was really asking questions. Again, I wasn't telling people, but everyone kind of just labeled me as this bad guy who was maybe a little bit lazy and I wasn't lazy. I was just mentally ill and struggling and felt so much pressure that after practice was over, I just wanted to run away from the rink because I was feeling so horrible. And so I didn't work out a ton or whatever. And the drugs and the drinking certainly didn't help. So I just thought my hockey career was over. Now all of a sudden I'm getting contract offers, and I remember signing. I remember being with my dad and thinking it was a good moment, but then things really fell apart because now all of a sudden you think about walking into that U15 team or whatever it was, U16, and now this is going into pro hockey, and I'm thinking like, holy, like I'm not equipped up here to take on the world of pro hockey. And I went to the American Hockey League, played 4 games, got hurt. And then that's kind of where I was introduced to painkillers. And that's where my life really took a drastic turn because all that pain, all that trauma, all those horrible feelings I had, they were there and they were so prevalent. My knee was hurt. I was in, I had to have surgery on my knee and was in pain. And so here's these pills, but I didn't know that they were physical painkillers. I just didn't know that they were emotional painkillers too. And so very quickly, I became addicted to these pills with zero understanding of what it was doing to my body as far as a physical standpoint, the physical addiction. And when I went to go stop taking these pills, all of a sudden I was in withdrawal, and then it felt so horrible, and I started to abuse them. And I had the doctor on speed dial, right? Because I'm a hockey player. Hey, doc, I need more pills, or my gym bag got stolen. No problem, et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of went on that way for a year and a bit until finally I just fell apart. Anybody that's gone down that path, I hope nobody listening does or has, but it just takes everything from you. So very quickly, I was no longer playing hockey. Lost my family. I was a young dad at the time. Lost my fiance because of my addiction issues. Tried to get some help, but was never willing to get honest, especially about the trauma from my childhood. Again, like I told you, I never told anybody. So I'd go to rehab and do all the work, which was like 95% of it. But that last 5% was everything that I was holding back. So I would just stayed in this cycle of addiction. And so from the time I was 22 to, 28, I probably went to 6 or 7 rehab facilities, 10 detox centers, had multiple suicide attempts where I was, pulled off the side of a bridge. I had intentional overdoses, waking up in the hospital with my parents there on heart rate monitors, and like that whole thing, and really not wanting to live. I lost hockey. I lost my family. I felt like I had nothing. And I had all this pain, and I just couldn't stop using these pills. And I didn't know that the pills that were given to me were basically just a pharmaceutical version of heroin. I didn't really have an understanding of that. And once my contract expired and I didn't have the hockey, I didn't have the preferential treatment from the doctors and all of that, it became pretty hard to get these pills. My dad actually caught wind that I was on these pills, and marched me into my family doctor and said, what the hell is going on here? And my family doctor had known me for a long time, was like, what have they got you on? Like, there's no way you should be on this much, et cetera, et cetera. And again, as time went on, I was seeking them too. I was like, you guys need to up my dose. I'm in pain, etc. Like, it wasn't just the doctor being negligent. In some cases, in a little bit he was, but also I was seeking, and I'm man enough to say that because I was just really liking the way that it felt, not really having that great of an understanding of how much my life was falling apart around me. Even though I knew it was happening, my sole focus was just because I just liked that feeling of those pills took all that pain away, and it just became everything to me. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe, felt like I could be in my own skin. It felt like I wasn't in fight or flight response and hiding things from people and trying to perform or whatever, and always just feeling like I was failing. So, it's interesting, I was failing more than I ever had in my life, but for the first time, it felt like I wasn't. And, the pills got taken away because the doctor was like, yeah, we're going to cut you off the pills. My dad was there when it happened. My dad's like, you got to get him off these pills. So they took them away. They're like, just cut me off cold turkey, and thinking that was going to solve the problem. But all that did was just force me to find them on the street. And one thing led to another. And this guy that I would go see to get these pills every time, he was using heroin, which was completely foreign to me. I still have a really hard time believing it. And he was always doing it. He asked me every day almost every day for like a year. I would say I was seeing him at 23 years old and I'd be like, no way, man. Like, I will never do that. Even though the pills were pretty much the same thing, till one day he didn't have any pills and I was in withdrawal and so sick. And, he's like, here, just try some of this and you won't feel that way anymore. And so that's what I did. And in that moment, I made the switch from Oxycontin to heroin and went on my way and started to hang out with even more marginalized people in places that you see in the movies, for lack of a better term, the crack shacks and the homeless people, and all that became the circle that I started to hang with. And in 2013 in Vancouver, heroin basically became obsolete, and the fentanyl came in and started to, flood the streets and started to kill a lot of my friends and people I was hanging out with, and almost took my life on several occasions. And in 2014, I found myself homeless on Hastings Street in Vancouver, which is arguably the worst place in Canada, maybe North America. I know there's some other places competing for that title tragically now because it's so bad, and in many places in the States and different places like that. But again, I grew up out there. My dad took me down there my whole life. If you don't go to school, if you do drugs, this is where you end up. Not me, Dad, not me. This could never be my life. But there I was, shopping cart and all, and resorted to doing some pretty horrible things to get what my body was screaming for, fentanyl, and ended up on the cover of Crime Stoppers and ended up having to serve 3 years in jail, which is a place I never thought I would be. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a bad guy. I never stole anything in my life. I never committed crimes and never thought I was capable of committing crimes. Like, still have a hard time believing that was my life, but that's where addiction takes you. Certainly it did for me. And very luckily I was arrested, because when I was arrested, there was a 3-week period after I was arrested for the first time in Vancouver, where there was a drug called W18 that came through and killed, I think, 1,500 people in like a month or something like that. And a lot of the people were people that I was hanging out with on the street prior to being arrested. Unfortunately, they lost their lives. And so I spent those years in jail and didn't really change anything, to be honest, Pods. It's not like there was a ton of support and help in there. basically just hung out with real criminals and learned more about that world. Unfortunately, I tried and tried to do some programs in there, but there just really wasn't much. And if you do too much of that, and then your time in jail becomes pretty hard, because it's the jail mentality, and this is not a fun place to be in. It's very violent, and I saw a lot of crazy things while homeless and in jail. It's a life that most people will never see, and hopefully never see, but one that in some sense I'm grateful that I got to experience it, only because I'm on the other side of it now, and I have that lived experience and that knowledge and understanding of what it's really like to be in those places. Because I'll tell you, I used to be extremely judgmental to homeless people and drug addicts as I was a teen. Just get a job, just quit, what the hell. But it's not that easy, and I lived it. Just to kind of fast forward, when I got out of jail there the last time, I was in Ontario now, and I had moved to Muskoka once I got out of jail, and kind of went down a bad path for the first 3 months, and I don't talk about that much, but there was a 3-month period of time where I kind of fell back into that old lifestyle, until one night I had this crazy epiphany where I was about, I don't know, 2 weeks sober, and my mind was so scattered. I was coming off 10, 11 years of hell. Hadn't had skates on in close to 10 years. I think it was 9 years. And I was going to go off and do something that wasn't great, let's just say. And I was going to do something, and I just had this thing come over me, where I started to have a conversation with myself, where it was like, you're really going to go do this? Like, what the hell are you doing with your life? Just go home and your life will get better than you've ever could have imagined. And I didn't know what that looked like, but I listened. For once in my life, I listened to my intuition. I went home, and while I was in jail, actually, or just after I got out, the Swift Current Broncos actually sent me a pair of skates, the Bauer APXs. This was back in 2017 or whatever it was, 2018, when they sent them originally, 2019 maybe. Custom extended white tongues, like my skates from my specs from when I played. And they said, forget about your old life, get back on the ice. And that's sort of what I did. I didn't put them on right away, because I'd had them probably for a year before, but I ended up, it's a kind of a convoluted story, but let's just say that I put them on and skated down the driveway that was ice and right onto a lake for the first time I skated in close to 10 years. And in that moment, I knew that I needed to do something with hockey, because I felt free. It wasn't about trying to make the NHL. I knew those days were long gone. It wasn't about trying to do anything. I felt so much peace when I was on the ice. I didn't have a stick. I didn't own a stick. I didn't have gloves. I didn't have anything. I literally was on welfare with nothing. Didn't own anything except for my skates and like one pair of pants and a sweatshirt. Like, that's all I had. But I knew I had to do something. But what? How am I going to coach? How am I going to do anything with this crazy history and all the horrible things that I had done?
Just going to take another short break here from the episode with Brady Leavold and episode 106 to share another great testimonial. This is a client that graduated the Peak Potential Project not so long ago, and actually has now joined my group coaching program and is thriving, continuing to thrive in that program. That's a fantastic group of young athletes that I haven't really talked much about, and I guess I don't really need to right now either. But Lucas is his name, and Lucas joined me, and he did have some performance issues. He was not playing his best hockey. He was not confident on the ice. He hadn't scored in 16 games or something. I think that was what it was, 16 games he hadn't scored in. It was tentative. He was a hard worker and with a high skill set, but just was absolutely petrified before games about making mistakes, and quite literally would go through worst case scenarios as part of his unplanned pregame preparation process. So he was frozen stiff by the time he got on the ice. He was petrified to extend himself, to try new things. He was in fear, and obviously was not playing his best hockey. And that's where we started. And they decided to get involved, and they took the Peak Potential Project. And this is a letter from Mom. Hi, Jason. I just wanted to share some positive feedback that Lucas received this week. My parents were in town and were able to watch his 2 games. After his league game on Sunday, my dad mentioned to him that it was the best he had ever seen Lucas play. Additionally, after practice yesterday, Lucas's head coach came up to him and stated that there were two great hockey minds in the stands for the game on Sunday. He didn't explain who these gentlemen were, but apparently they passed on positive feedback to the head coach, specifically on Lucas's performance. This likely would not have happened had they watched him play earlier in the season. They would have seen a skilled player that works hard, but it would have been overshadowed by visible frustration and a lack of confidence. Needless to say, we are so grateful for your program. Lucas is so much happier than 2 months ago, and he is finding pride in his play. This legitimately is 8 weeks later. 16-game goalless streak, in the dressing room, thinking about all the worst-case scenarios, scared to make a mistake, easily frustrated on the ice, visibly bad body language, to being the star of the weekend, the best the grandparents had ever seen him play, that other people in the stands are picking him out as a premier player. And this is probably the most important part of the whole thing, he is so much happier than he was 8 weeks ago. Like, the impact this can make is enormous. And for the value, I mean, like I said, if you take this as a team, it's $300 a player. Is that letter worth $300? If you take it as a guided mission, it's $1,000. Is that letter worth $1,000 to have a happier kid who's now performing and thriving, that is getting picked out of the crowd, that is not fearful of making a mistake, that is not petrified before he goes on the ice? Obviously, everyone has different results, but some of these are so dramatic that I need to be sharing them more. And like I've said before, I think that I need to start reading these because I get these, and they're not one-offs. Like, these things happen very consistently, and it just gets me excited about, the growth of what I'm doing and about the message that needs to get out there. Like, they're both obviously needed, right? Like, our kids need these tools. Our players need these tools. They need to be given some of these strategies and the support required to implement the strategies so they can thrive, so they can be confident, so they can be happy, so they can enjoy the sport more, so they can build confidence in themselves that they can handle their business. And when we build amazing humans that can handle their business, they're going to be better hockey players, and we leave the sport in a better place. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you to Lucas for being a willing participant. I always congratulate my players, because those that go all in and those that jump in with 2 feet and actually apply what it is that we're working towards, and they implement it and they work on it, they deserve all the credit in the world, and they deserve the fruits of their labor, because that is being committed to the process. And that is one of the things that I teach them in week 2, is about getting committed to the process. And when they fall in love with the process, they fall in love with what it takes to have a growth mindset and what it takes to get to where you want to go. And good things are going to happen. So once again, thank you for sharing that letter with me and Lucas. Thank you for going all in, and I wish nothing but the best for you the rest of the way. And we should get back now to the conversation with Brady Leavold.
Talked about my podcast earlier. I got this, idea that maybe my story can help one person, and I borrowed a computer from somebody and recorded that first episode of what was Hockey to Heroin: The Road to Recovery. And through doing that, started to get a lot of messages in my inbox of former hockey players who had struggled in similar yet different ways. Some of them very eerily similar. And to further that, I started to hear stories of hockey players who had lost their life to suicide, to overdose. And the numbers still today, as I sit here, I'm aware of 98 hockey players who have died from suicide or overdose. And again, I don't blame hockey for it all. I think hockey certainly plays a role in some of it. But I just wanted to use hockey as the vehicle to really break down the barrier to injury for these conversations to take place. Because when I was going through it, I certainly felt like the only hockey player who was really struggling. And boy, was I wrong. Found out my roommate from my time in the American Hockey League had died of an overdose. My coach, my first year pro, had died of an intentional overdose. And so I realized that hockey was no exception. And again, this happens everywhere, to firefighters, to police officers, to lawyers, to doctors, to hockey players, to homeless people. It's affecting everybody in some way or another. And I wanted to do something about it. I continued my podcast and then, started a clothing line with messages like mental health over hockey. And what we do as part of our stuff is we put a name of a hockey player. So I have Emily Mada, who tragically took her own life in 2022. In my hat, I have Daniel Miner, who played for the Barrie Colts, who died of a fentanyl overdose in 2021. So now, like I said, there's 98 hockey players in our database, ranging from retired NHL players down to 14-year-old girls and everywhere in between. And we have a nonprofit side of that as well that we're building to really, hopefully support not just hockey players, but coaches and parents and even fans and anybody that sees it. It's not just, it was originally just supposed to be for hockey players, but I realized that, nothing should be just about hockey. This needs to be about humans. And if we can use hockey as the vehicle to really ignite the change in these conversations and to allow people to find healing in whatever way they need to find it, it just comes down to supporting one another and being there for one another. Because I felt like, even though there was people along the way that helped me, I really did feel alone. And I felt, a lot of these guys that, I thought were my brothers, that I played with, I felt, and again, I don't know what it's like. I kind of know what it's like to be on the other side, where you just feel like you can't have somebody like that in your life, so you cut them out. But I just don't think anybody knew how to really understand me or to try to help me or to even want to help me, because it was so maybe foreign and scary. But in the end, it's not, because it's happening everywhere. There's two former BCHL hockey players and one former WHL player right now that's homeless on Hastings. One of them's a good friend of mine that I've tried to help and now I can't find. A couple guys I know that are in jail, and hundreds more who are struggling with mental health and addiction issues. My inbox is flooded every day, with primarily hockey players who are struggling. And I just really wanted to be a part of the solution, using my story and bringing people together so that, we can start to save lives, certainly here in the hockey community. So that's sort of a long story short. And now I think, but maybe your listeners don't know, I do keynote speaking. I'm back coaching hockey. I have my own skills business that, I run ice, do team practices, individual stuff. And I've been very, very fortunate that I was brought into the Muskoka Hockey Group last summer, which is spearheaded by Sam Gagner, but got to be on. We lost. Oh, there we go. I get to be on the ice with some of the best players in the world. Guys like Sam Gagner, Bo Horvat. I was on the ice with John Tavares, and the list goes on. Kevin Ball, Matt Luff, and just to be in that environment again, being on the ice has been such a gift, and a place where I never thought I could get back to. I coach young boys, young girls, and I've really found that parents and associations actually are being a lot more open-minded with this, and realize that a guy like myself with a story, and we all have a story that can help, because we all have that experience one way or another that we can share with the next generation, whether it's hockey or outside of hockey. But it's been it's been awesome to see the reaction and understanding of parents to say, hey, like, we do know that this can happen to anybody, and we actually want you to be around our kids and to share your story and to be a mentor and to be just to be there and in hopes of helping one person not go down that same path, or maybe not the same path, but one person who may be struggling, who feels like they can't tell anybody. Well, it's so important for people to feel like they can be vulnerable, because that is what saved my life, is vulnerability and asking for help and sharing. Started with one person. And I don't encourage everybody to take to social media and share your every deepest, darkest secret like I have, but it certainly has helped and provided a lot of accountability. And I'm just super, super grateful to be alive and to be back in the hockey community, to be back on the ice. I'm also playing senior hockey. I'll tell you though, back playing senior hockey, I feel old. I feel slow. But it's funny because I was always pretty fast and like forechecker and get in there, and like my mind wants to get to places, and my body's like, you're not getting there at all. Like not even close are you getting there, Brady. So I'm trying to develop like this new game where I'm like slowing everything down, and if I can get there, I'll get there, but I better find a way to contribute on a different way. And it's been so much fun just to be in and around the environment again. And I think, the biggest thing that I've have an understanding of, and I'm just so thankful to my dad and to my grandparents and to everybody along the way who uh, you know allowed me to play this unbelievable game, because without hockey there's no way that I'm alive right now. Like I can sit here and say, okay, concussions played a part of my story, the knee injury played a part of the story, the oxys played a part of my story, but I'm telling you that hockey was what saved my life time in and time again. Like my whole childhood, though maybe it was a healthy, unhealthy addiction to hockey. Like if I didn't have hockey, I probably would have got into that path way younger, when a lot of my friends that I hung out with started to go down that path, but I didn't, because I was playing hockey, and it gave me that reason to keep going. And the people in it, like, let me tell you, like the hockey community has rallied around me. And when I was ready to stand up and start to try to take my life back, there's thousands of people all over the world that were here to hold my hand and help me up. And for that, I am so grateful. And I feel so lucky to be a part of the hockey community in any way, whether I'm on the ice or doing something like this. So it's been a wild ride, Pods. But I firmly believe that I went through everything that I did. I went through everything that I did to get to where I'm at today. And I always tell people this: I wouldn't trade my life for Jaime Benn's life. He was my line mate. No disrespect to Benny. He was my line mate in Kelowna. The guy's made $100 million playing hockey. He's won a gold medal in the Olympics, almost a Stanley Cup and Art Ross Trophy winner. But I just wouldn't. I don't have a ton of money, but I know what my purpose is. And I just feel very fulfilled. And that's something that I never felt this level of fulfillment when I was playing hockey, because I think hockey, our journeys are individual, whether we like it or not. And it's all about, my next contractor. Am I going to make this team? And even though, you know what it's like to be on a team, like we're teammates, but let me tell you, we're competing against each other for positions, for power play time, for penalty kill. And it can be healthy and it can be fun. It can be great. But my life isn't about what I'm trying to accomplish anymore necessarily. And it's just trying to be a part of something bigger than myself. And that's been the answer for me. And that's where I've found a ton of healing and growth and purpose. So hopefully that wasn't too long, but I could talk about this all day because there's so many layers to my story.
No kidding, man. I just let you run there because that's just what I do anyways. You want to speak, you speak, you get to be the guest. So I love hearing all that. I just can't believe, like, if I got it right. So you get out of jail, and I think, I don't know, curious for me, and maybe the listeners are too, you're kind of doing your same things again. You have this epiphany in the wee hours of the morning, it sounds like, and then some skates show up on your door from Swifty. Like, how the hell do the Swift Current Broncos find you to send you skates?
Yeah,
so put them on? Like, that just seems so crazy.
It's kind of like, if you really want the details, what happened is that I went to jail for 2 years in BC. Thank you, Jenna. And when I got out, I moved to Ontario. And when I did, they sent me a pair of skates, but I never put them on. I had them for probably a year. And actually,
who did that? Like, that's like such an awesome gesture. Like, how did that happen? Do you know where that came from?
It was a trainer, I guess, that was my trainer. He no longer works for the team, and probably could have gotten some trouble for doing it. Who knows? But it really saved my life. And actually, I'll tell you the true story. So actually, when I had them, and I ended up getting into some trouble in Ontario. So 2 years in BC, I went to jail in Ontario for a year. I always just say 3 years because it takes so long to explain the story. Yeah. But they sent them to me when I got to Ontario, and I never even opened them, took them out of the box. It was too painful. And actually I went to jail, and somebody actually took them and pawned them in a pawn shop. They were never worn. They were $1,200 skates. They were in the pawn shop the entire time I was in jail. And when I got out of jail, I went to the pawn shop and they were in the front window in the box with my name on it, with everything, for $75. For $75. And I didn't have the $75 to get them out. My friend actually took me down there and got them out of the pawn shop. And then that was like within that same kind of period. So I had them, and then I probably got them out of the pawn shop, had them for 3 or 4 days, and then had that epiphany, and then decided to put them on. So that's how, like, it's a longer story, but it's hard to, it's kind of a cool story, to be honest. It's wild, but
Sure it is.
that's kind of how it happened. And then I just decided to put them on, and I never looked back. And really grateful that, like I said, the hockey community, True Hockey got caught wind of what I was doing really early on, way before I had any sort of following on social media. And they were like, hey, we want to support you any way we can. Because I was using I think I was on the ice one time and I was using like a stick that, those road hockey sticks that get worn down like this, because I didn't even have a stick. And they saw, and they're like, we want to give you whatever you need. And so now I'm, essentially partnered with True Hockey, and they've been really great in providing me gear and different things. And, just another one of those stories where there's incredible people involved in this game who saw a guy who needed a hand up and was ready. And I'm just so grateful for that. Doug Gilmore's brother, Dave, is the reason why the Puck Support clothing line exists in the first place. He did a small fundraiser a couple years ago on his 70th birthday. He ran 20K and biked 50K, 70K on his 70th birthday. I couldn't even do that now.
Right.
And up in Kingston, and raised close to $3,000, and said, here, Brady, you can do whatever you want with this money for Puck Support. It's not enough for what you need. I needed about 10 grand to do what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what to do with it. And that's when I went out and bought a heat press and a vinyl cutter, and self-taught myself how to build a website and do e-commerce and make clothing and all that. So without Dave Gilmore doing that, Doug's older brother, I had no idea. That was really one of the first people that helped. Even somebody, he hates when I say this, but a guy by then, because I never really talked about it because he told me not to, but I'm going to out him on this one. No one knows this. Ryan Thorpe, I don't know if you know Thorpe at all. He was drafted by the Canucks many, many years ago, played a little bit of pro hockey, but he saw what I was doing. And I remember I was doing my podcast from a borrowed computer, and that computer was old, and I ended up breaking it or something, and it wasn't working anymore. And so I took to Facebook just saying, hey, and the reason why I did this was because it was about 10 episodes in, and when I started my podcast, and then I was going pretty hard, like twice a week. Now all of a sudden I don't have a computer. So I had to make it this post and say, hey, I have issues with the computer. I don't have a computer. I'm working hard at getting a new one. I just want everyone to know that I'm not going anywhere, because all of a sudden if I disappear, people think I relapsed or whatever.
Right.
Well, guess what Thorpe did? Thorpe sent me a couple $1,000 so I could get a MacBook and still have that computer, still have it today. And, there's been a lot of people along the way. Other people, I had no teeth when I started, hockey injury, but I didn't have teeth, right? I lost my ones when I was homeless and everything else. And there was a couple people that came together and was like, hey, we want to help get your teeth fixed, right? People in the hockey community. And so I'm just, there's been literally gifts that have fallen from the sky, and I'm just so grateful to the game of hockey and the people in it. I just don't know where I would be without it. I know where I'd be. I wouldn't be here. That's for damn sure.
Goodness gracious, I got so many notes, and I want to get to them. We're have to have part 2, I think, because I'm supposed to be on another call. But yeah, there's this even the sobriety aspect. Or you said you've been sober now, and I don't even know what sober technically means. For you, maybe we get into that. But for 3 years, and that whole hockey sky, I want to talk about how does that it was a decision essentially. Maybe I asked the question now, but is that what it was? Was it a decision? Because it sounds like it was just like you turned on a light switch and said no more.
Yeah. And this is the thing that's really hard for me to explain to people, because people want to know, parents want to know, people who are struggling want to know, like, what did you do? Like, my story involves rehab and detoxes, but not this time. I tried all those things, and I believe fully that every time I did anything like that, I acquired some new tools to put in my tool belt. Whether I was going to use them now or later, I acquired these tools through the work that I did. So it wasn't for nothing, let's say, all those times. Even though I wasn't able to maintain a long-term recovery, I was still learning as I was going. But you talk about this, I cannot explain it. There that night, that epiphany where I was going to go literally do something that was criminal, because my mind was so scattered and I had no money and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was going to go do something. And it was just like a voice was talking. I sound crazy saying this, Pods, but it was like, turn around, go home. You don't need to know what's going to happen, but your life is going to be better than you ever could have imagined. And then that was the next day. I put my skates on. A few days later, started my podcast. And from then, it became about purpose. I was driven. The messages I was getting, the people that were reaching out. Sportsnet did a story. Sports Illustrated did a story. And now all of a sudden I have this accountability because I've outed myself with my story. And I'm like, oh, I got to keep going. And I felt, I'm getting family members who had lost loved ones to suicide and overdose who are like, we can't believe you've made it out of this. That's all we wanted for our son. And now we're looking to you. And so it provided this accountability piece. But the other side of that is, when that happened, I also knew that I was going to have to revisit 5-year-old Brady, and I was going to have to do some therapy surrounding that sexual abuse. And I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to have to go back and revisit it, 2.5 years later now. But I did, 6 months of, a couple times a week where I was talking to somebody and working through that. And that gave me the strength, because that was the big piece for me that was really keeping me sick. Because you talk about being authentic, and I wasn't going to sleep every night worrying about the lies that I was creating for myself, and putting on these masks of this person that I did that for so many years. I'd walk into the hockey dressing room and I'd try to be whatever I had to be there. And, I was in jail. I try to be whatever I had to do there. I'm homeless. I got to, put on a mask there and try to act a certain way, and make sure nobody really knows what's going on with me. But once I was able to start to talk about that, it just felt like this weight was taken off my shoulders, where it was like, you don't need to use drugs or alcohol anymore to deal with that. The other side of that is, let me tell you, it's been a struggle over the last 3 years, because I still have severe mental health issues. I still have trauma. I still have triggers. I still have really hard days. Actually, February was probably the worst month in 3 years that I've had, this past February, where, it wasn't about like, oh, I'm going to relapse, because that was never a question for me, but it was really low, where I started to have those really negative thoughts about questioning what I'm doing. Why am I still here? And I think a lot of people that I've talked to had a really tough February. And now, the sun's out, and I have a beautiful, not just on the outside, but on the inside partner who I can talk to and share things with. And for me, that's been a game changer. It's not just her, but other people in my life. You mentioned what is sober for you, and like, it's really interesting. And we might have to have a part 2 on this. But for me, plant medicines have been a real game changer. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear about that because it's kind of this unknown. But some people will be like, oh, well, Brady, you're not sober because you use plant medicines, microdose mushrooms, or whatever. And my question is a lot of these people who say that, they're on antidepressants from the doctor and different medications, and they're mood altering substances, but they come from a pharmacy, so people think it's okay. And listen, if it works, great. I think if somebody has something that works for them, then do it. But if you really want to talk sober, I guess you're not sober if you're taking any pharmaceuticals either. If you want to tell somebody who's taking natural medicines, they're not sober. So like, for me, I don't drink. I don't use drugs, like hard drugs. I do, use plant medicines, but again, not just because I'm looking to escape. I do it with intention. I did a lot of research. I have a lot of mentors that have helped me navigate that space when the time was right, because I didn't do it right away. It was something that I, tried for myself because I had exhausted every resource and every medication from the doctor, and things just weren't working for me. So for me, I needed to explore other options, and I'm so glad that I did. Having said that, I always tell people, never do something just because somebody else is doing it. Make sure that you put yourself, and that goes for like medications. Like, I wish I would have researched Oxycontin when the doctor gave it to me all those years ago, but I didn't question the doctor because I thought, doctor knows better than me. What the hell am I? Who am I to question what a doctor is going to prescribe me? I don't know anything about it, but I should have done more research. And I want everybody to advocate for themselves a little bit more, to ask questions, and just, I don't know, for me, I try to really stop and think about the choices that I'm about to make, because for me, I made too many choices that were just like, yeah, I'm going to do this without thinking about the consequences. So everything that I do in my life, and is because it's long and thought out, especially with the medication side and the things that I use in my life for my recovery. It's because I've researched and had conversations, and I know what has worked and what hasn't worked for me. But again, for me, like, medications are not always the answer. It's like, we live in a society, pods, where it's like, oh, you're feeling depressed, here, take a pill, right? But it's like, why are we feeling depressed? Like, why? Well, what is it? And we can go back to the mindset, and going back to, like, actually going back and working through those traumas and getting getting ourselves to a place where we're not reliant on trying to just escape from the problem. Like, it's the old adage of, if you see a bunch of kids floating down the river drowning, you're just going to continue to pull them out one after the other. It's going to get exhausting until finally you're like, hey, I need to go to the top of the river and figure out how they're falling in the first place.
Teach them how to swim, buddy.
Exactly. Right. And so that's where this comes back to. And for me, my recovery, my life, it's not perfect. I'm not 100% happy with the way it is. It's much better than it was where I was. I was an IV drug user for 8 years. Like, my scars tell the story. I'm no longer doing that. I have a better life today than I've ever had in my whole life, better than I ever could have imagined. But I still know that it's always going to be progress. I'm looking for progress. I'm trying to continually get to a place where I'm just okay with who I am, and I'm not having to take a pill to feel better or whatever. But I've also accepted the fact that maybe this is what I need to do for me right now, so that I can get to a place of greater healing and understanding of who I am and what I need to do for myself, and just trying to enjoy the process. And it's not necessarily about the destination now. It was always about the next contract, or the next team I'm going to make, or the next training camp I'm going to. And it's always this next. And I'm really just trying to learn how to enjoy the moment, be present. It's hard with technology and cell phones, and I'm addicted to my phone now. And I can say that. I think a lot of us are. But I'd rather be addicted to my phone than addicted to drugs. So I'm a work in progress, buddy.
Hey, well, you know what? And the fact that you're bringing everyone into that work, I think is, that's why it's so compelling. And I try and do that even with my work, like there's areas of resistance that I lean into. I try and share that. I think that, like, being that authentic, real, helps. And especially with where you've been and where you're getting to, and the people that you're bringing along with you. I think it's super admirable. And yeah, man, like we talked about the mindset aspect of it, and I alluded to earlier, like the difference between mental fitness and mental health, and I think they're connected. I think for me, I think mindset dictates mental health. You talked about decisions. I think these micro decisions all the way along, like the more empowered we can keep adults as well, but I mean, we work with amateur athletes, we can empower them to make these decisions, that they step away from those decisions and feel good about what they did. Every time they make that one decision, right, you're building self-belief, you're building confidence, you're building awareness. I really do believe that giving them the tools early on not only makes them healthier and, more engaged citizens, makes them better athletes. And it's just something, we're both doing it from different angles. And this testimony is ringing in my ear. This girl, this 18-year-old girl that just took the course. She was like talking about how it helped her on the ice. But then the part that like really like spoke to me was her ability to say, the way I can the way the tools you gave me to be able to manage my thoughts, now I have less bad days. Like, and I was just like, I mean, it sounds kind of soft, but it's like, isn't that kind of like really impactful, having less bad days?
Unbelievably impactful. And I would encourage you to share those testimonials, because that's your work, man. That's the tangible evidence that you have of what you're doing is working. And I know we're probably gonna get going here soon. I'm a big believer in collabs and doing things together. There's something in me that's saying, like, I think there's going to be a time where you and I need to collab on an event where I can share my story and you can share what you do, and we can directly correlate like the like resiliency and mindset, and how I didn't have that and where that took me, and then how important it is to develop that. And that's where like you can kind of come in and teach that. It's something for you to ponder, but I really think that there would be an opportunity for us both to do what we love, and to say, look, this is what it was like and my story can be it seems a little extreme, and in some cases it is. But if I told you the amount of hockey players that had lived a similar life or are currently living a life that like I was living, it would blow your mind, man. So it's not, I thought it was like the black sheep, the one guy who didn't, that's how I felt. And it's not, but there's a lot of people who are really struggling. And I believe there's a lot of young athletes right now who are struggling with their mindset, and because of that, it's making them struggle with their mental health, and then that is where it becomes dangerous. When you don't have the good mindset, you're struggling with your mental health, that's when things like drugs and alcohol start to, you try something like that and it makes you feel better for that short period of time, and then that can become that habit or routine. And I don't know. I really feel called, since we had this conversation, whether it be an opportunity for us to work together. And, I'd encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. And I'd like to talk to you again, maybe off podcast coming up here in the near future. Maybe you don't have time today, but of how a little bit more about like what you do, and how I can maybe direct some of the players that I work with, to yourself and to your program, because I don't think anybody has all the answers, but that's, I can tell my story, and share how important it is to take care of your mental health and to, work on your mindset. But I don't have that course. I don't have that knowledge. That's not what I do. But I know there's a ton of people that I work with and talk to that could really benefit from doing your course and working alongside you. So, I would love to talk about that more down the road.
I love it. Yeah, I'm all in.
And if there's anything I can do to help support you or your brand, man, like you can reach out anytime. And where are you in Kelowna?
Vernon.
Well, okay.
Predator Ridge, right in between.
Lucky. I love it up there. My dad's actually got a place over by Parker Cove on West Side Road there.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so I haven't been up there for many years, but I used to spend my summers on Okanagan Lake, and it to me is my favorite. The Okanagan is about my favorite place in the entire world.
I mean, we'll talk offline for sure. And I think we probably should have a part two. I'm doing a small player series too. Like I'm doing something like that speaks to the players, late developers, right? And the disadvantages they have, but the advantages that also can be, and to help them with the mindset around that. So I'd love to get a piece with you from that later.
For sure.
What else is interesting? Just even like the whole social structure, like that's not hockey related. That's just the human in me. Like, you having an inside look at what that looks like, and what the answers are from the government, and nothing seems to be working. It sounds like there's not much rehabilitation involved, and I'd love to talk about that. Even like the vulnerability side, and there's just so many things that like are coming up. The overwhelmingness that you must feel from like having people reach out to you that you're supposed to solve their problem for them just because you're sharing yours, right? Like,
oh man,
there's obviously there's so many things that like my head's going to, but I do got to run. But and by the way, with your collab, think about this for a little bit. I'm thinking of having a what I'm calling right now in my head a mindset summit for like whether it be a weekend or like a week-long thing where I obviously I'd have a piece in it, but I want to bring in collaborators to share their story and have it be about mental fitness / mental health.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, to me, like I was like, oh my gosh, you'd be amazing in that capacity. So
I'm all in, buddy. Just keep me
cool.
in the loop. You want to do part 2? We'll do part 2, and let's
Awesome.
build a relationship moving forward. Like I said,
All right, boss. Yeah, well, I'll fire you an IG text here after we're done. But thanks so much for being here again
you
today.
bet, buddy.
I mean, what a great story. Love what you're doing. Love what you're about. And I love that you're getting the support because isn't that kind of really, that's interesting because that's sort of an underlying message of everything, right? Like
Yeah.
Your vulnerability has allowed you to allow people to help because people do want to help, and I think that's an unbelievable message. And now you're able to help more people because people want to help you. So connections, people out there, connections, the more connections we make, some people in business call it networking. I call it connections. I mean, like I'm a better person for this conversation for sure. I know something's going to happen from it. So by all means, follow our lead, have some conversations out there. And Brady, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Pods.
Thank you so much for joining us today for that conversation. Brady and I really enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. I think it's a message that needs to be not only said, but Brady's story needs to be told, and Brady needs to tell his story. And the more he tells his story, I think the more he keeps it connected to him, and I think it's some form of therapy for him as well. So I know that he benefits, I know I benefited, and I hope you, my podcast listeners, benefited from hearing his perspective on such a tragedy, but also such a awesome reclamation, for him to be doing what he's doing right now, supporting himself through his story, through his message, and supporting others and making such a massive difference in the lives of people out there who are going through their own hell. Or who have lived with somebody who has gone through their own hell, and to somehow try and understand it a little clearer, a little better, to be able to lend that ear where maybe you wouldn't have done it before, maybe ask that extra question. There's so many learning lessons from listening to a story like that, and I am very happy that we were able to have that discussion. Mental health is a real thing. Mental fitness is also a real thing. And tools and strategies given to young people, or adults for that matter, can make a massive difference in their emotional and psychological and physical well-being. So definitely appreciate Brady for joining us today. There's so many more questions that I have for him, one of which is the social structure of like what is happening with homelessness. I know it's running rampant here in British Columbia. I have no idea where you're listening to this podcast from, but it's definitely a problem here, and it's a political issue. It's a government issue that they're trying to find ways to help. To me, it sounds like the help is usually found in like we need to have higher wages, or we need to find housing, or we need to find more jobs. I'm not a politician. I'm not in government, but that to me doesn't sound like the issue. The issue sounds like it's a root problem. There's some type of rehabilitation that has to happen, and tools, mental fitness tools need to be provided, and support needs to be provided. And somebody like Brady, who has been through it firsthand, first person, lived it, gone to jail, been through the system, understands what's there for support and what isn't, would be a great place for government officials to start to have the conversation. What needs to be done to really change this problem? Giving somebody who is sick, giving somebody who is addicted, giving somebody who doesn't have the mental tools required to handle adversity and to be more resilient is not going to do better because they have a house over there, a roof over their heads. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answers. I don't know what the project should be, but I do know that if I was in politics, I would be seeking people out like Brady to find out their story and to get their insight into what might make a difference. So that is a conversation I definitely wanted to have with him, and I look forward to having it. I know there's a lot more that we could touch on there, but once again, I appreciate you. I appreciate you, the listener. I appreciate you being here till the end, and I hope this conversation was one that held value for you. And I guess that's a wrap. Until next time. play hard, and keep your head up.